Okay, let's get into it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Welcome to tonight's info session from the 2025 Charter Revision Commission. Tonight, we'll share a presentation about the Commission's work, our final report, and the 5 proposals that the Commission has forwarded to New York City voters this November. After that presentation, we'll move to a question and answer session with our Executive Director, Alex Schierenbeck. Please use the Zoom question and answer function, which is along the bottom bar of your screen in Zoom, to submit those questions. We'll answer them as we go. To answer the first question that's in the question and answer session, yes, this will be recorded. It will be shared on the Commission's YouTube page, and the slides that you'll see will be shared on our website as well. But before we get to all that, we'll hear from Anita Lermont, who's a member of the Charter Revision Commission. So again, thank you all for joining us, and over to you, Commissioner Lermont. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm Anita Lermont, a member of the Charter Revision Commission. As many of you probably know, last month we voted to put 5 initiatives on the ballot this year, 4 on housing and land use, and 1 on even year elections. These proposals were informed by 7 months of public input and careful study. At 10 hearings and in written testimony, we heard from thousands of New Yorkers from all walks of life and every corner of the city. I want to express my profound thanks to the more than 600 New Yorkers who came out to testify before our commission and the thousands more who submitted written comments. You reflect the boundless passion that New Yorkers have for building a more affordable and responsive city. When we had the honor of joining this commission, we were charged with tackling our city's deep housing crisis. No one can deny that the status quo is simply not working. Every New Yorker knows that the rent is indeed too damn high. The housing crisis determines who we are as a city. How can we ensure that New York City remains a cradle of opportunity for people of all backgrounds, as it was for much of the 20th century? We've worked exhaustively to find solutions that meet this moment, and I'm proud to say that we have a set of proposals before us today that can set us on a path toward a more equitable, affordable city. The 4 housing proposals before us today would speed up the types of housing that New Yorkers say they most need, but which suffer the most under the status quo: affordable housing and small projects. These changes will help our city address the most pressing citywide needs, like our housing and climate crises, while maintaining local voice in land use decisions. New York City's existing land use process, or ULURP, will continue to be the primary vehicle for land use changes in New York City. But we've learned from 50 years of ULURP and 36 with the City Council, and we have identified ways to fix the process where it isn't working, while keeping ULURP where it is working. Finally, I'm proud that we are also tackling the issue of New York's chronically low voter turnout by proposing switching New York City elections from odd to even years. Increasing voter turnout gets at the root of many of our other challenges as a city, and I am grateful to the passionate New Yorkers who put this issue on our commission's agenda. We also considered a number of other issues over the past 8 months. For more information on those, I recommend that you read the report. Throughout this process, we've striven to fulfill our responsibility as an independent commission, considering ideas on their merits, regardless of who proposed them and regardless of who supports them. I'm confident that this set of proposals lives up to that charge. I also want to emphasize that ultimately, these changes will be up to voters this November. Nothing will change unless improved by a majority of voters. So with that, I'm turning to Alec for more information. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you, Commissioner Lermont, and thank you everyone who's here this evening for this presentation. I'll be walking through in more detail the Commission's process and the 5 charter proposals that'll be on your ballot this fall, and then we'll answer any questions you have about the proposals. We have a very good group here tonight for a summer evening, so thank you for being here. As we mentioned, this is being recorded, and so if you're not able to make it tonight, you can send this link to others, and we'll also be holding additional public information sessions through the fall as part of the Commission's broader effort to make sure the public understands what will be on their ballot. Next slide. As Anita mentioned, the commission's proposals are really the culmination of more than 7 months of study and deliberation and listening to New Yorkers about how to revise our city charter, which is effectively the city's constitution. Over the course of the last 7 months, the commission held 10 public hearings, 2 in each borough. We heard 30 hours of live testimony from New Yorkers. Hundreds of New Yorkers attended our hearings in person and online, and we received over 3,000 written comments. The comments received by the commission were detailed and thoughtful. They touched virtually every aspect of city government and city life. And the proposals the commission is forwarding to voters this fall emerged from that testimony. Everyone really is rooted in and shaped by the testimony before the commission. In April, the commission put out a preliminary report, which you can still read. It's online. It documented the problems that were of most interest to the commission, and it pointed the way toward potential solutions. Then, through a series of more public hearings, New Yorkers helped us refine those ideas into concrete proposals, which were made public early in July. And after another round of feedback and comments, were ironed into concrete proposals for amendments to the charter and a vote on July 21st. Next slide. In this work, the commission's staff has been lucky to serve under the leadership of a very distinguished group of New Yorkers that understand our city very well. Richard Bury, the CEO of Robin Hood, the anti-poverty organization, and the former deputy mayor who helped launch Pre-K for All, served as our chair. Sharon Greenberger, the CEO of the YMCA and former head of the School Construction Authority, served as our vice chair. Our commission had leaders in the nonprofit sector, Grace Bonilla of the United Way, Valerie White of List New York, former chairs of the City Planning Commission, leaders in affordable housing development, and housing advocates like Shams DeBaron. Together, it's a group that understands how government works and, importantly, also understands when it's not working. Next slide. So, on your ballot will be 5 questions formulated by the commission. Separately, there's a state constitutional amendment on the ballot this fall related to Parkland Upstate. We won't really be talking about that too much, but that will be question 1. The 5 proposed charter amendments will be questions 2 through 6 on your ballot. Question 2 proposes a fast track for affordable housing. Question 3 proposes a new, faster land use review procedure for modest housing and infrastructure projects. Question 4 proposes a new affordable housing appeals board. Question 5 would modernize and digitize the city map. And question 6 would move New York City's local elections from odd years, like this year's election, to the same year as presidential elections in order to significantly increase participation in local elections. Across our public hearings, one thing that the commission heard overwhelmingly from New Yorkers is that we face an affordability crisis that is maybe the worst in our city's history. New Yorkers have told us that they feel the effects of the housing crisis every day. Lifelong New Yorkers have told us that they've been pushed out of the neighborhoods they grew up in. New Yorkers have told us about having to crowd together in apartments that are far too small. They told us that one small setback can put a working family on the edge of eviction or into shelter. They told us about the struggle that young New Yorkers face when they want to plant roots in our city or return to the city to live after college. And they told us about how often they say goodbye to friends or family that are moving out of the city or out of our state in pursuit of housing that they can afford. The facts are sobering. Today, over 50% of New Yorkers are rent burdened, meaning they spend over 30% of their income on rent. This year, 106,000 New Yorkers are spending their nights in shelter, including over 36,000 children every night. The problem is so severe that the average family of 3 would have to spend almost 50% of their income on rent to afford an average 2-bedroom home. Why are we seeing costs escalate so quickly? Why do prices seem to go up and up? Well, our city has long understood that the root of its housing crisis is a shortage of housing. Simply put, we don't have enough housing to keep up with the desire to live here. Since 1960, New York City has been in a declared, quote, housing emergency, defined as when the vacancy rate is below 5%. Today, the city suffers from a net rental vacancy rate of 1.4%. That's lower than at almost any time since the emergency was first declared. That fact, a profound imbalance between the need for housing and the amount of housing we have, creates a structural imbalance of power. what you might call a landlord's market. And in a landlord's market, New Yorkers outbid each other for the few homes that are available, and the prices continue to climb. Landlords have all the bargaining power. And as New York, as it has been for the last few decades, is fortunate to add great jobs and attract people from all over the world, the leverage of the landlord only gets stronger. The way to counteract that problem is to shift the balance of power back toward the tenant. With more homes available, tenants can be choosier. Without a shortage, landlords have to compete for tenants rather than the other way around. Now, why does New York have a housing shortage? The answer is that New York isn't building enough housing to meet New Yorkers' needs. Over the last few decades, a growing economy coupled with historic decreases in crime and improvements in city services and amenities has fueled demand to live here. But housing production has simply not kept up. From 2010 to 2023, for example, the city created more than 3 times as many jobs as homes. Multiple recent estimates have found that over the next 10 years, the city is about 500,000 homes short of a healthy housing market. But we only produce about half as much housing per year to make that number. New York's own history shows that we can produce much more than we do today. In the 1950s and 60s, we produced twice as much housing per decade as we did over the prior 2 decades. And when we did so, we did a better job of keeping housing costs under control. Other cities around the country are also doing a better job of controlling housing costs and even lowering housing costs by producing more housing than we do. In fact, the evidence consistently shows that cities that build more are the ones that are the best at holding down costs. Now, although there are many reasons why we aren't building more housing in New York, the primary reason is fairly simple. In much of the city, we've made it illegal to build more housing than exists today. In 1961, a citywide change to the zoning resolution radically reduced the amount of housing that could be built in the city. Overnight, the ubiquitous 6-story apartment building, which is a workhorse of affordability that defines many out-of-borough neighborhoods, was outlawed. That effort, which emerged out of a Robert Moses era, sought to remake New York City in the vision of the new suburbs, often making it illegal to build anything other than a 1 or 2 family home, even on commercial corridors and in places very close to the subway. Today, housing production in the city is highly uneven. While some neighborhoods see transformative levels of housing production, many see no housing growth or have actually lost housing in recent years. From 2014 to 2024, 12 community districts added as much housing as the other 47 combined. That failure of some parts of our city to add housing accelerates the development pressure on other parts of the city and raises prices overall. And as a consequence of rules written decades ago, districts that are adding the most housing are disproportionately Black and brown, while the districts that are adding the least housing are disproportionately white. The consequences for our city run deep. We've already talked about the human costs. But the housing crisis affects where we live. Although we don't like to talk about it too much, New York City's metropolitan area remains one of the most racially segregated in the country, more segregated even than Birmingham, Alabama, and St. Louis, Missouri, by some measures. Our crisis affects the dynamism of our economy and our culture, as employers find it difficult to retain talent, and the artists and creators that can make New York so exciting find it impossible to make ends meet. The crisis also affects New York's presence on the national stage. New York State is slated by some estimates to lose 2 more congressional seats in the next congressional districting because we are growing more slowly than the rest of the country. And so our ability to have a presence and to shape what's happening in Washington, which we all know certainly influences what happens here in New York, is put in jeopardy by our failure to grow and to plan for growth. There are so many important aspects of the housing problem, not all of which are captured or addressable through the charter. Rent stabilization, for example, provides a critical support for over 1 million apartments, but it's largely controlled by state law, not the charter. Property taxes shape what's built and where, but they are largely a creature of state law. There's budget support at the federal and state level that influences what housing we can build and where, and what housing we can preserve. But that's not a function of the charter either. What the charter does control, though, is the land use process, the process through which we approve changes like zoning changes. And the proposals we'll talk through involve just that, the process for land use review. Today, most land use changes, like a request to allow more housing to be built in some parts of our city, go through ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. ULURP was written into our charter 50 years ago, and in many ways, it is the envy of other jurisdictions and a model. It provides a clear timeline for review. It provides a path to integrate local feedback and borough feedback and expert feedback and the views of democratically accountable elected officials. The commission heard virtually no testimony, and we heard a lot of ideas calling to scrap ULURP altogether. And the commission did not forward any proposal that would make wholesale changes to ULURP. That said, we have 50 years of experience with ULURP today, and 36 years of experience since the 1989 reforms that replaced the city's Board of Estimate with the City Council at the end of the ULURP process. And that experience has revealed certain flaws in the current public review procedure that the commission is seeking to address in a targeted manner. In its hearings, the commission heard that the city's existing process limits the city's ability to build publicly financed affordable housing, particularly on city-owned land, delaying badly needed projects and raising costs of construction. The commission heard that the length, cost, and uncertainty of going through ULURP means it almost never enables small changes. Because ULURP is one size fits all today, applying the same procedure to massive projects and modest ones, only large proposals, which will bring in enough revenue to justify years of costs and risk, are ever put forward. And the commission heard that ULURP does not work at all in some parts of the city. Proposals for land use changes that add affordable housing are vanishingly rare in the districts of council members who are known to be opposed to any affordable housing production, even though our city is suffering from a profound affordability crisis. The commission's response is to propose faster, simpler, less political process for defined categories of housing, affordable housing, and modest projects. ULURP remains in place for most projects and in most places. Any land use change will still need public review. Even if voters approve these proposals, nothing will become, quote unquote, as of right or automatically legal to build. The proposals all preserve community board review where it exists today. The proposals would not shorten community board's opportunity to weigh in on proposals by a single day. And environmental review, historic district and landmark protections, labor protections, construction and safety standards, all stay the same. As I said, the commission's proposals are deeply informed by testimony to the commission, and the commission's gratified to see the breadth of support for these ideas. Controller Brad Lander has called the proposals a bold vision for inclusive growth that could make a real difference in tackling our housing crisis. The Regional Plan Association has said the proposals stand as the most impactful solutions put forward in this generation to address our housing and environmental crises. The New York Housing Conference, Homeless Services United, and the Municipal Arts Society, among others, have also announced their support for the reforms. And many of the proposals emerge directly from the suggestions of these groups, the people who build affordable housing, groups that represent the most vulnerable New Yorkers and ordinary New Yorkers that are struggling to stay in this city. Okay, so let's get to the specifics. For the second ballot question, remember there's that other state constitutional amendment, but this is the first proposed by the commission. The commission proposes an amendment that would create new fast-track public processes for affordable housing. First, the amendment would create a new zoning action for publicly financed affordable housing projects administered by the Board of Standards and Appeals, also known as the BSA. Second, the amendment would establish a fast-track public review procedure for applications that deliver affordable housing in the community districts that produce the least affordable housing. These changes are intended to help New York City build more affordable housing, allow affordable housing to be produced more quickly and at lower cost, and to help ensure that every community adds affordable housing. The first proposal creates a fast track at the Board of Standards and Appeals for publicly financed affordable housing projects. At its hearings, the commission heard that the existing charter mandated process for creating new affordable housing is too long, too costly, and too unpredictable. As builders, including minority and owned businesses, policymakers, and others testified, Today, the process puts affordable housing projects through a long and complex rigmarole that delays affordable housing and drives up costs. Even the city itself, when it wishes to build affordable housing with taxpayer funds, faces obstacles rooted in the existing charter. By streamlining the procedure for approval and reducing the amount of money the city and builders spend on process, more money can go to housing itself, delivering more homes at a lower cost and at deeper levels of affordability. The BSA is an independent body, expert body, with 5 commissioners appointed by the mayor, each of whom is subject to the advice and consent of the city council. Under existing law, the BSA already possesses the power to waive zoning requirements to facilitate certain affordable housing developments. Just to pick one example, in 2018, the BSA granted variances to allow for a 6-story residential building with 66 units of affordable and supportive housing in Queens. BSA's existing authority, however, is onerous and difficult to navigate. By creating a broader, shorter, and simpler action, the fast-track zoning action would allow more affordable housing developments to obtain zoning relief through BSA. To be eligible, a project must need zoning relief in order to execute an affordable housing project. The project must fit within neighborhood character to ensure that affordable housing respects the communities that it's added to. The project must be publicly financed. In other words, only projects backed with city funds are eligible. And a project must be sponsored by a housing development fund company, which is an entity regulated by state law and created for the sole purpose of developing or preserving affordable housing. On the fast track, community boards will have guaranteed review for the full time that they do today. Then the BSA will have a review, typically for 30 days. All in, this path could provide a way for publicly financed affordable housing to be approved faster than a project today waits to even enter public review. Next, the Commission is proposing a path to fast-track affordable housing in the community districts that produce the least affordable housing. As we discussed today, a few neighborhoods produce the majority of affordable housing. Others build mainly market rate housing, and some produce no housing at all. These dynamics contribute to rising costs, segregation, displacement, and gentrification. They severely restrict housing opportunity in much of the city and push many lower-income families and households to neighborhoods they would otherwise not choose to live in, or out of the city altogether. The facts are stark. The top 10 council districts average about 750 new affordable housing units a year, but the bottom 10 average just 3 units a year. In some parts of the city, moreover, housing changes aren't even proposed. As you can see on the right, in some parts of the city, there hasn't been a single proposal to add housing in the last 10 years, not one. As the builders of affordable housing tell us, the reason is straightforward. In some parts of the city, the politics of approving affordable housing are too toxic, even though these same communities, like all of New York, are in dire need of more affordable opportunities. Now, the City Council recognizes this problem and has taken significant steps to fix it. In 2023, the City Council unanimously passed the Fair Housing Framework, a landmark law that sets affordable housing goals for every community district in the city. Under that law, the city will assess how much housing we need every 5 years, and then it will make sure every community district has a goal for both housing and affordable housing. But because the City Council couldn't amend the charter, the Fair Housing Framework doesn't change the process for actually approving housing. Today, we have the Fair Housing Framework and goals, but if a community district doesn't meet its goal, nothing happens, nothing changes. The fast track for affordable housing tries to change that dynamic. Building on the City Council's framework, the proposed amendment is intended to increase the production of affordable housing across the city and help ensure that every neighborhood contributes to the need for affordable housing. Every 5 years, beginning in October of 2026, the city would release a report on the rate of affordable housing creation in each of the 59 community districts over the past 5 years. And in the 12 community districts that created the least affordable housing, a new fast track would apply. In the rest of the city's 59 community districts, in other words, in 4 out of 5 community districts, nothing would change. But in the bottom 12, applications that are required to deliver affordable housing under law, under the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program would have access to the fast track. The fast track would include the same 60-day opportunity for community board review as exists under ULURP today, including the extended time for applications that come over the summer. To speed review, the borough president's advisory review period would run concurrent with the community board. Following the community board and borough president, the city planning commission would have 30 days to review an eligible application and hold a final vote. From start to finish, this process would cut in half the amount of time that covered applications spend in public review. In this way, the Affordable Housing Fast Track is a targeted effort to promote more equitable development of affordable housing while preserving the ordinary process of land use review for most things in most of the city. Again, because the fast track only comes into play in the 12 community districts that permit the least affordable housing, by design, it only affects outlier districts, the few that produce the lowest affordable housing. In the rest of the city, the ordinary process is there. The Affordable Housing Fast Track is designed ultimately to buttress the City Council's fair housing framework in important respects. When reviewing whether to approve an application on the fast track, the City Planning Commission would be required to assess an application's consistency with the community district goals in the fair housing framework. The Commission's proposal also goes a step further in writing the fair housing framework into the city's overall capital investment system, requiring the city's 10-year capital strategy to incorporate the fair housing framework to ensure that investments in affected communities are proactive. Because we know communities don't just need new housing, they need the investments that make whole, healthy communities. Unlike a typical rezoning process, moreover, the proposed amendment would explicitly require the City Planning Commission finds that applications are adequately supported by transit and sewer and other infrastructure before they can be approved. These measures underscore the fast track isn't a rubber stamp. It's a review that will require specific findings related to the fair housing framework and local infrastructure, in addition to the usual requirements that any application be consistent with sound planning. Next slide. The next question, question 3 on your ballot, would simplify review of modest housing and infrastructure projects by creating a simple review procedure for actions that will add modest amounts of additional housing, protect New Yorkers from flooding, and create new open space. ULURP today is a one-size-fits-all process, subjecting both big and small changes to the same process of public review. In many cases, the full process of public review set out in ULURP is appropriate. But the one-size-fits-all approach means that many modest changes, such as proposals to enable a small amount of additional housing, unlock affordable housing on public land, or protect flood-prone communities, are forced into lengthy, costly, and uncertain process. This proposal would create a shorter, simpler, and more predictable process for modest and categorically beneficial projects like resiliency upgrades, while leaving ULURP unchanged for larger ones. The new simplified review procedure is known as ELURP, the Expedited Land Use Review Procedure. From start to finish, ELURP would cut the amount of time that covered applications spend in public review in half. As today, ELURP would begin with advisory review by the community board and the borough president. The community board would have that same opportunity for public review that it has today, 60 days, as well as extended time for applications that are reviewed in the summer. To save time, the borough president's review period would run concurrently with that of the community board. Following that 60-day period, the City Planning Commission would have a 30-day review period to hold a public hearing and vote to approve with modifications, or disapprove, a decision that would be final. Sometimes, for projects that require City Council review under state law, it would be the City Council that comes in at the end, replacing the City Planning Commission, meaning ELURP would end at the Council. So what's eligible for this process? Modest housing projects, which are strictly defined with different rules for low-density parts of the city and higher-density parts of the city. Actions when the city acquires land for affordable housing, or leases or sells land for affordable housing development. Certain city map changes, like those that are related to affordable housing, and certain infrastructure and resiliency projects, including raising the grade of a street to protect a community from flooding. Importantly, to be eligible for ELURP, your project has to be modest. If you're the kind of project that under state environmental review law has potentially significant adverse effect on communities, you're not eligible for this simplified procedure. Those kind of bigger changes are categorically out and will remain in ULURP with its more extensive and longer review. To talk more about what's eligible for ELURP, let's start with housing. Next slide. Today, ULURP does not work for proposals that add modest amounts of housing. Only large projects resulting in a doubling or tripling of how much housing is allowed on a site can sustain the cost and risk associated with ULURP. I've served on my local community board for the last 5 years, and many with us I know tonight have served on community boards or do that now. So you know what I'm about to say is true. The only projects you see are the ones that result in pretty big changes. And the only people who propose those projects today are bigger developers that often know how to navigate our complicated process and spend a fortune on lawyers and lobbyists, while smaller builders like MWBEs and mom and pops are locked out. In the Commission's view, there's something profoundly wrong with a system that only delivers big changes, the kind of changes that communities find it hardest to wrestle with, while categorically preventing the kind of modest and incremental and organic changes that communities most want to see. This new process is about unlocking the kind of projects that today public review just doesn't deliver. We started by looking at what ULURP doesn't capture today. We looked at everything that's gone through ULURP in the last 10 years. And here's what we found. There wasn't a single application anywhere that involved a jump of less than 30%. Not one. We looked at the applications in low density neighborhoods, and we found that even in the lowest density neighborhoods, all but 2 applications in the last 10 years involved a big jump to a medium or high density zoning district. That means that even in our low density neighborhoods, the changes that are being sought involve significant increases in density. The housing projects eligible for this new process are the kind that ULURP doesn't work for today. If you're in a medium or high density zoning district, which you can see on the map colored in yellow, a rezoning to enable up to 30% more residential floor area, that's space for housing, will be eligible. So if you could build, say, a 7-story building today, and you want to be able to build a 9-story building, you could go through this shorter process. Again, there were 0 actions of this kind in the last 10 years enabled under ULURP, underscoring that these kind of small jumps just don't happen today. Importantly, if you want to use all that new space and you're in a medium or high density neighborhood, you'll need to deliver affordable housing, either through the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program or through the city's new universal affordability preference, known as UAP, that was created through the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. Next, if you're in a low density area, which you can see in the map colored in blue, a rezoning to enable a modest building with a standard height no taller than 45 feet and with an FAR no higher than 2 could go through this simplified process. 45 feet is the height of many large and older single-family homes in our area. It's a familiar building type in every community in the city, and it fits well in lower density communities. By unlocking the modest opportunities in low density neighborhoods, we can add housing while respecting the character of these places, and we think that's a great thing. Next slide. ULURP will also be a way to allow the city to more quickly deliver modest infrastructure projects. If there's a crisis as pressing as the housing crisis, it's climate change. Communities across the city are feeling its effects with rainfall and flooding and coastal storms and heat. Unfortunately, much of our existing infrastructure isn't prepared, and time is running out to protect vulnerable communities and build a more resilient energy infrastructure. To ensure these projects are delivered with urgency, we need to bring them to fruition years sooner than we currently are. ELURP would provide a simplified path to deliver modest climate and resiliency projects. For example, raising the grade of a public street can be a simple and effective way to promote resiliency in flood-prone communities. But as Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine testified to the commission, today the city can't elevate the grade of a street more than a de minimis amount without changing the city map, which triggers ULURP. The need to undergo ULURP before raising a street's grade, even by just a couple of feet, can make it more difficult to protect flood-prone communities with the speed that our challenges require. At the same time, to avoid the delay that comes with ULURP, the city often does street reconstruction or rehabilitation projects that don't incorporate resilient design to avoid triggering delay. As a result, ELIRP would allow the city to move more quickly to change the grades of public streets. It would also make it easier to deliver modest resiliency projects like waterfront projects to shore up the coastline from flooding by allowing associated city map changes and the acquisition of small or other irregular properties that are adjacent to public property. Today, waterfront resiliency projects can get stuck in years of delay because they involve decades-old inaccuracies in the city map. Today, also, adding solar panels to public property can trigger a full ULIRP for site selection or disposition. ELIRP would make that process faster so we can scale up clean power on public land. And today, if there's a homeowner in a flood-prone area who wants to sell their property to the city and get out of harm's way, we need to go through a full ULIRP to acquire that property. That doesn't work for homeowners. They don't want months of delay and uncertainty before they know if the city will buy their property. ELIRP would make it easier for the city to make voluntary buyouts of small homeowners in harm's way. To be clear, if an acquisition isn't voluntary, this isn't the process. So to review, ELIRP is available for, next slide. Okay, we got it. ELIRP is available for modest housing proposals of the kind we almost never see in ULIRP today, dispositions, acquisitions, and city map changes that support affordable housing, dispositions of sliver lots that are so small or irregular that they cannot be independently developed, city map changes and site selections and dispositions for resiliency projects, and voluntary flood buyouts. But even if something falls in these categories, if under environmental review law, a project is the kind that has potentially significant adverse impacts, it would not be eligible for this process. That helps doubly ensure that the projects in ELIRP are categorically modest and minor. In the next ballot question, question 4 on your ballot, the commission proposes an amendment to eliminate the mayor's power to veto a ULIRP for applications that would create affordable housing and replace that power with a new Affordable Housing Appeals Board consisting of the borough president of the affected borough, the speaker of the city council, and the mayor. The appeals board would have the power to reverse city council decisions on land use applications that create affordable housing, but only if 2 out of these 3 democratically elected officials agree. This change is intended to strike a better balance between local, borough, and city voices in the land use process. ULIRP would otherwise remain the same, from community board review through consideration by the city council. Now, across months of testimony, perhaps the leading thing heard by the commission about the city's planning process is that it gives too little attention or force to borough-wide and city-wide perspectives. Today, worthy affordable housing projects that could help address the city's housing crisis are rejected or downsized or never even proposed in many parts of the city. The end result is the city's housing production is concentrated in just a few neighborhoods, as we've talked about, and parts of the city are virtually off limits to land use changes that would make production more equitable and serve our need for housing. The Affordable Housing Appeals Board would modify ULIRP so that it continues to emphasize local perspectives, but with a check that give that broader borough and city perspective greater weight than it has today. The change would elevate the role of the borough president in the land use process as a democratically accountable official who occupies a middle point between hyperlocal and citywide perspectives. Borough presidents who already have a role in the land use process and work intimately with community boards are well positioned to strike the right balance between local and borough needs. The council would be represented by the speaker, an official who can channel local interests as well as citywide needs, given that a speaker is both elected by one council district and selected by and accountable to the council as a whole. And while we would be removing the mayor's power to veto ULIRP applications, we'd still have a citywide perspective in the mayor to give the mayor a concrete but qualified role. The power of the appeals board is limited in important respects. First, the appeals board can only review applications that would create affordable housing directly, such as applications that involve the city's mandatory inclusionary housing policy. Second, the appeals board could take no action unless 2 of these 3 independent elected officials agree. So unless you have the agreement of a speaker and a borough president, a mayor or speaker, or a mayor and borough president, nothing about a project can change. Third, the appeals board would only come into play for land use applications affecting a single borough, meaning that citywide changes and changes affecting more than one borough continue to receive the same review they do today. Fourth, no land use application will go automatically to the board. Either an applicant has to appeal to the board, or 2 out of the 3 members of the board need to call it up for review to occur. And fifth, the appeals board's power is much narrower than that of either the city council or the city planning commission. Those bodies have the power not only to approve or disapprove a land use action, but to craft new changes to a land use proposal. The board would lack the power to craft new changes. Instead, it would only have the power to reverse a council disapproval of an action approved by the City Planning Commission, or restore a modified application, an application that was changed by the council in relevant part to the form approved by the CPC. And again, only with the concurrence of 2 of the 3 members. At root, the appeals board is about giving affordable housing projects another chance of success in our process. So it's easier for important affordable housing projects to get across the finish line. In the next ballot question, question 5 on your ballot, the commission proposes to modernize the city map by centralizing and digitizing a city map that currently exists as over 8,000 paper maps across 5 separate offices. The city map establishes the legally defined locations of streets and widths, street names, the legal grades of streets, as well as the location of mapped parkland and public places. Consolidation of the 5 boroughs into New York City occurred 125 years ago, but a unified city map of all boroughs was never adopted. Today, the city map, as I said, consists of 5 different sets of maps. And the commission heard testimony, including from practitioners and former borough president staff, that this system can impose significant costs and time on infrastructure, housing, and other projects, and that consolidation is long overdue. As the commission heard, there can be startlingly anachronistic practices that impose significant cost in time and money on infrastructure, housing, and other projects, both public and private projects, that require confirmation of or changes to the city map. Confirmation of jurisdiction for an infrastructure project in a waterfront area where coastlines have changed over time and property records can be spotty can take a physical trip to consult fragile canvas maps from over 100 years ago. A street demapping for an HBD-sponsored affordable housing project can add close to a year of additional time, even for projects that already go through ULURP. To bring city map administration into the 21st century, the commission proposes to replace the existing decentralized paper city map with a single digital city map administered by DCP. The commission proposes a deadline of January 1st, 2028 to consolidate the borough maps into a unified city map. Once all the maps are in DCP's possession and scanned, DCP will then be in a position to create a digital version of the map. And this map would be given a legal effect to obviate the need to consult paper maps for almost all confirmations. That digital city map would be formally approved through another citywide ULURP starting no later than 2029. This would render the digital city map generally effective for almost instant confirmations of the city map, which today can take much longer. This change would also centralize the address assignment function at DCP. The process of tracking the unique addresses of properties and buildings is the backbone of many of our information systems at city agencies, and it's used by countless city agencies to locate buildings for permitting, for tax assessment, emergency services, and other functions. Next slide. Okay. We're past the housing and land use reforms. Our next change hits a theme different, our election system. Now, New York has a vibrant civic life, but voter turnout in New York City elections is abysmal. In 2021, just 23% of registered voters participated in the general election, even though every local elected official, including the mayor, was on the ballot. In fact, while the city has over 4.7 million active registered voters, only around 1 million of them voted in the 2021 mayoral election. This problem isn't new. New York has for decades suffered from chronic voter disengagement. Turnout levels were consistently above 50% through the 1970s and 1980s, but participation has steadily decreased since then. Registered voter turnout has not exceeded 40% in a mayoral election since 2001 and has been below 30% in every mayoral election since 2009. In the sixth and final ballot question, the commission proposes an amendment to move the city's primary and general election dates to even-numbered years so that city elections will be held in the same year as federal presidential elections. That reform is intended to improve voter turnout, make local democracy more inclusive, and save taxpayer money. Shifting elections to even-numbered years is maybe the simplest and most effective way for New York City to significantly increase voter turnout. A similar change has been implemented successfully in many cities across the country, which have seen immediate improvements in voter participation, including electorates that are more representative of the public at large. The commission has heard considerable testimony in favor of shifting local elections to even years. At public hearings of the commission, the Brennan Center for Justice, Citizens Union, League of Women Voters of New York City, Common Cause, Reinvent Albany, Citizens Action, council members like Councilmember Gail Brewer, and others testified in favor of this change. The Independent Campaign Finance Board similarly called for the city to align its local elections with even-year state and federal elections as a, quote, proven way to increase voter turnout. As these supporters have observed, local elections in New York City are generally held in odd-numbered years that don't coincide with other statewide or national races, which results in lower turnout in local elections. While 53% of registered voters cast a ballot in the 2024 presidential election, just 23% voted in the 2021 odd-year mayoral election. Turnout in the last three presidential general elections was between 53 and 62%. That's more than twice as high as turnout in the last three general elections for city office. Across the country, voter turnout is consistently higher in cities with even-year elections. According to a study by Citizens Union, the 6 largest U.S. cities that hold elections in odd-numbered years see average turnouts of between 10% and 38%, while the 6 largest cities that have their elections in even-numbered years see average turnouts between 50% and 75%. A shift to even-year elections would also help ensure that New York's electorate represents the diversity of its people. As the Brennan Center for Justice testified to the commission, elections in odd-numbered years exacerbate disparities in participation for voters who have historically faced barriers to the franchise, including voters of color and younger voters, which means that moving municipal elections to even-numbered years can make the city's democracy more inclusive. The commission was very fortunate to work with former United States Attorney General Loretta Lynch to examine the effect of this change on the representativeness of the voting population. She observed that while all racial groups will benefit from increased turnout, Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters would see an even greater improvement in turnout. Indeed, the average turnout rate of Black voters triples from odd-numbered years to presidential years. Asian voter turnout also triples, and the average turnout of Hispanic voters is almost 5 times greater. Even-year elections would also save taxpayer dollars. Consolidating even-year schedules reduces the frequency of local elections, saving administrative time and public funds that can be reallocated to voter communication and education. In New York City, the Independent Budget Office suggests that the savings would total almost $42 million every 2 years. That's equal to the annual budget of the Department of City Planning. Even if this change is adopted by voters, it will not become effective immediately until there are additional changes in state law. Today, the New York State Constitution requires that all city officers be elected in odd-numbered years. So a state constitutional change is also necessary before New York City may shift its local elections to even years. That said, the prospect of reform at the state level seems promising. In 2023, the legislature and governor enacted legislation to move village and town elections to even years. And in 2024, a statewide constitutional amendment that would give New York City the option to move its local elections to even years passed the state Senate. In view of these potential benefits, higher turnout, more representative electorates, and significant cost savings, the Commission is forwarding to voters a proposal that would move local elections to those presidential years if and when permitted by state law. Those are the 5 charter amendments that New Yorkers will have the opportunity to consider in November. This fall, the Commission will be conducting a full public education campaign to help New Yorkers understand these proposals. You can stay tuned to developments about that at nyc.gov/charter. Okay, so why don't we just turn to your questions now?
All right. Thank you so much, Alec. So again, just as a reminder, if you have questions, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom chat. There's a little icon that you can see on the screen that should show up along the bottom of your browser, whether you're on a computer or on your phone. Looks just like that little gray speech bubble with a question mark in it. You should then be able to type a question in. We have gotten some questions already. Thank you for submitting. And we've gotten some via email when you registered as well. So we're just going to go through these. Again, please feel free to submit your questions. And of course, if you have others that come up after we're done here this evening, or if you're watching a recording on YouTube, please get in touch with us via the form on our website, and a member of our team will get back to you as soon as we can. So with that, Alec, to our first question from Mimi. Why can't we get housing for our homeless, building housing for the homeless, and getting them out of shelters and into apartments?
That's a great question. Thank you, Mamie. Look, you're right. Homelessness is a huge issue for the city, and the way to solve that crisis is by providing more housing. These proposals would facilitate housing for formerly homeless New Yorkers, especially question number 2, the Affordable Housing Fast Track, which would make it easier for city-funded housing to be built, including for formerly homeless families.
Great. Thanks, Alec. Moving to the second one, we actually got this from a couple different people, and I'm sure it's one that's on many New Yorkers' minds. What is considered affordable housing?
Great question. Okay, so in general, affordable housing under city programs means that housing is limited to 30% of a resident's income and is available only to families that earn below a certain amount. In the first part of question 2, the BSA Fast Track, affordability comes from government subsidy, capital funds, and it's required under state law for the housing development fund companies that are the organizations that are eligible for that. These projects are generally 100% affordable, and they reach low or no income families. In our final report, we actually have a chart to give you a sense of the last 5 projects that HPD sponsored through HDFCs. And you can see that many have rents as low as $397 or $589 and are available to households earning as little as $0 or $26,000. And then they go up from there to more middle-class families. For the second part of question 2, the Affordable Housing Fast Track, affordability is required through the Mandatory Inclusionary Housing Program, or MIH. And that program requires permanent affordability to households making effectively between 40 or 80% of area median income, or AMI, once you pair MIH with the tax subsidies that those developments rely on. AMIs are updated every year, but in 2025, the monthly rate for a 2-bedroom apartment at 60 AMI is $2,187. So what you see is that affordability can mean a lot of things, but that specifically through the BSA Fast Track, the deepest levels of affordability can be achieved through government subsidy. And then on the fast track for the 12 community districts that are building the least affordable housing, we ensure a range of affordable incomes through the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program.
All right. Thanks, Alec. Our next question is actually a comment, but I do think it gets to something that we've heard quite a bit throughout this process. Comes from Charles Nye. Says, public comment is important, especially at community boards, and public comment periods need to be separate and more than the time period being proposed. So if you want to answer about community board review more broadly and the time periods, and why not a longer period of time?
Yeah, thank you, Charles. And I've served on a community board, so I agree with you that community boards are important and really can help shape projects for the better. And the commission decided to keep community board review everywhere it is today and not to shorten it by a day. And that reflects, I think, the value of community input. And so, I think you see that reflected in these proposals, that there was no desire to weaken or dilute the role that local communities have in shaping proposals through the community board process.
Great. Thanks, Alec. Next question comes from Adrian. It says, in East New York, there's so many buildings for housing that the community is now overcrowded. Less parking is available on the streets and skyrocketing property taxes for homeowners trying to stay in their homes. Can they, and I think they here means the housing that's going up in East New York, be built in Staten Island or Long Island?
Well, you've identified a very real issue, Adrian, which is that some parts of our city are seeing a lot of housing construction and others aren't. Now, we can't affect what's built on Long Island through the city charter. That's outside of our jurisdiction. But we can affect where things are built in New York City. And when some parts of the city are doing a lot and other parts of the city are doing very little affordable housing production at all, New Yorkers rightly feel like not everyone's doing their part. And so I think, as we try to walk through in these proposals tonight, many of the questions on the ballot are trying to get at just that problem. How do we advance affordable housing in every community so that every community creates options for working families? And by doing so, we actually reduce the development pressures that today fall on just a few neighborhoods.
Thanks. So we've gotten quite a few questions on the city map, and so I'm going to try to combine a few of them just for the sake of everybody's time. But if you have been asking about the city map and you don't hear an answer to your question here, please feel free to just put it back in the Q&A function and we'll get to it. So combining a couple here. One is just a comment. While question 4 is digitizing the city map sounds efficient, labeling it modernization obscures major facts. This is not a tech update. It's a sweeping power grab sandwiched between hot button issues of affordable housing and even your elections. And then similarly, what is going to happen with the current setup of new addresses by the borough president's topography office?
Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, so for folks who don't know today, the official city map, again, as I said, exists across 5 separate offices and thousands of paper records. City map confirmations are important. They're an important part of the building process for housing, for infrastructure. But those aren't discretionary reviews. It's meant to be a ministerial function. And this proposal would just unify those maps, not change the way any discretionary review occurs. So to me, that's not a power grab so much as genuine centralization and efficiency. We also heard from countless practitioners and folks who used to work in the topographic offices that the process today is slow and inefficient. We heard from folks that achieving a digital city map, which functions as the effective city map, is not possible with decentralized administration of the city map. And so those things together are what motivated the commission to propose one office, one city, one map, and to make that a digital map rather than continue to consult fragile paper maps. As for the address assignment function, the proposal is to transition that function to the Department of City Planning. There's a deadline for doing so, 2027, which allows for a runway to effectuate a transition. The idea is we should also have uniformity in how address assignment occurs, which will promote efficiency in all the critical city services that rely on address assignment, like emergency services.
Thank you. So the next question is still on city map. You did address this a little bit, but if you just want to elaborate, the question is, who would decide what the new addresses are?
Yeah, so the commission's proposal is to centralize address assignment at the Department of City Planning.
All right. Okay, moving to the third of our questions, question number 4. Does the appeals board only relate to actions involving affordable housing?
Yes, to be eligible for the appeals board, a project must be one that directly facilitates the creation of affordable housing. That's like a rezoning application that will require developments to include affordable housing under the city's mandatory inclusionary housing program. What we were hearing from folks at all of our hearings is that one of the biggest issues with the process we have today is its failure to create the affordable housing we need. And so we thought it made sense to create a review procedure that targets that issue. How do we try to give affordable housing projects another chance of success while leaving other kinds of land use actions, maybe controversial actions like the siting of a city-owned facility or the creation of a hotel, in the ordinary process as it is today? Those kind of projects are inherently non-residential, and they don't directly facilitate the creation of affordable housing, and so nothing about those will change.
Great, thank you. This is another one we got via email. What parts of the city will be subject to the affordable housing fast track? So this is in the first of our proposals, question 2.
Yeah, this is a great question. So we don't know is the short answer. No district would be subject to the affordable housing fast track until 2027. And it's really too early to say which 12 districts will have the lowest rate of affordable housing production at that time. Part of that is because there have been recent changes to zoning law and affordable housing programs that are changing the dynamics of what's built where. In 2024, the city enacted the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity Plan, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, and a citywide change that it's expected to boost affordable housing production and alter the patterns of development across much of the city, including in neighborhoods that have historically lagged in affordable housing production. Recently, the city also created 2 new affordable tax incentive programs, one called 485X and one called 467M. And both of those incentivize affordable housing, which will probably alter how much affordable housing is built and where. But every 5 years, there will be an assessment of which community districts have lagged most in affordable housing production, and it'll only be those where the city is fast tracking affordable housing projects.
All right, thank you. Similarly, on the affordable fast track, why is the City Planning Commission given the final say in the affordable housing fast track?
It's a great question. So the affordable housing fast track is a targeted intervention that is designed to affect only those outlier parts of the city. The 12 of 59 community districts that produce the least affordable housing. And it does so because it's intended to be an intervention that affects only the parts of the city where the existing land use system is broken because affordable housing isn't being delivered. The City Planning Commission is a body with 13 appointees, with appointments made by the mayor, the public advocate, borough presidents. 12 of the 13 members of the City Planning Commission are subject to the advice and consent of the City Council, which the Commission thought was important because it means the Council maintains a very important check over the Commission that will promote accountability. The CPC has expertise and perspective to answer the core questions that the fast track wants to ask. Is there enough infrastructure for this project? Does it meet the goals of the fair housing framework? And so on. And for those reasons, because the CP has a big role in the land use process today and is capable of doing these approvals, because there are important checks from other democratically accountable actors on the City Planning Commission, and because it's intended to be an intervention only in those parts of the city where the ordinary political process is failing is the CPC at the end.
All right, thank you. This is sort of a long personal story and question from Joseph, and so I'll skip over part of it for the sake of time, but share, I think, the gist of it. Says, NYC Connect, which I've been using to find my own place, how many buildings are registered within that data bank? Joseph says he got an email stating he's not qualified for a certain project due to some confusions about a voucher, and his question is, will some sort of expedited process for submitting questions to Housing Connect about where the applicant is in the process, or for regulation of giving periodic updates of where the application is, affordable housing will be greatly enhanced by a system that can speed process and timely information and get those units bringing in income?
Yeah, Joseph, first, I mean, I'm sorry you're going through these, troubles with the housing lottery. And I think that just how difficult this process is to navigate underscores just how many challenges that New Yorkers face in finding an affordable and safe place to live. The housing lottery itself isn't something that's laid out in the city charter. So it wasn't within the scope of what the commission looked to address. But I will say that part of the frustration with the city's affordable housing lottery is that there's so much demand for affordable apartments and so few options available for the people who need them. And that's why you'll see, for the few apartments that are available, thousands of applications for just a few apartments. And so part of what these proposals are intending to do is create more affordable housing options. So this process results in connecting more New Yorkers with places they can call home.
Thanks, Alec. And thanks for sharing, Joseph. Moving to the elections proposal, what effect would changing the elections for local offices to an even year have on midterm elections for the federal government?
Yeah, that's interesting. Short answer is no change. Congressional and midterm elections, like the gubernatorial cycle, would remain the same. Our proposal would only move local elections to align with presidential election years.
All right, thank you. Moving, I think this is actually about both the fast track and ELERP. The question comes from Katie. What is the borough president's length of review period? Is it still separate from the community board review period?
Okay, so for ordinary ELERP, nothing changes. But in questions 2 and 3, something does change. If you're in one of those bottom 12 community districts, and it's one of those affordable housing projects that qualifies, then the community board would have the same amount of time as it does today, but the borough president's review period would happen at the same time. And the same is true in question 3. If you're one of those modest housing projects or one of those climate housing projects, community board review, same length of time, and the borough president's time would overlap.
All right, thank you. So this one comes from Joseph. In the 1980s, the Public Development Corporation was a clearinghouse for city-owned properties that rebuilt areas like Park Slope, Alphabet City, and areas in the city that were basically abandoned. Is there anything like that being formulated today?
That's an interesting question. It's a little bit outside the 4 corners of our proposals. The proposals the CRC is putting forward, I should say the Charter Revision Commission are putting forward, don't relate to how the city acquires or ends up with property. We ease the process, but it doesn't create like a new entity to make that acquisition. But it does allow for the city to more quickly activate city-owned land for open space or resiliency or affordable housing projects. But again, nothing in these proposals has to do with exactly who manages this land at the end of the day. One thing to keep in mind, Joseph, is that the charters are constitutions. And so we wanted to create processes that are targeted and don't dictate all the policy outcomes, so that future elected officials, city councils, borough presidents, mayors can fill in some of the details to fit the changing needs of our city over time.
Thank you. So we've gotten quite a few more city map questions. I'll read a few of them so that people can sort of get the flavor. They're largely about if there is a transition of where the city maps currently live, how that transition would be handled. So just to read a few of them here, digitizing, modernizing the city map sounds engaging, but it is a superficial description. What impact will it have on providing daily services to city agencies, elected offices, community boards, long list of other jobs? What plans are in place to maintain that daily roster of work that the topographical bureaus perform if their offices are centralized within DCP? Similarly, an example from a borough president or borough president's office as a data point, the city map change in Staten Island for Cromwell Promenade on the waterfront was presented to the Topo office on January 30th, 2023. After some back and forth, the final signed Mylars were picked up on May 18th, 2023. How is that not fast? Similarly, with limited zip code spacing within certain areas, will there be a collaboration with the U.S. Postal Service to determine addresses and a few others that relate to any potential transition between the existing setup of the city map across 5 boroughs and the proposed consolidation?
Yeah, okay. So the amendments propose a lengthy runway for a transition, because I think the commission heard testimony and appreciates that over time there has been deep expertise developed in borough president topographic offices about how to manage these important functions. At the same time, a modern city has a need to update its practices. And that's why ultimately there is a transition to one central administration and a digital map. But as the commission makes clear in its report, we believe that any transition to a centralized city map is going to rely on that borough president topographic office expertise and the staff of the folks who have done it. And it's a multi-year process to make that transition. And we've already been in contact with borough president offices in expressing the desire for the commission, at least, that the city work hand in hand to do this and to effectuate a transition for all the experts that are working in topographic offices and that are critical to maintaining these functions. Yes, the city will continue to work with the United States Postal Service in determining addresses. And whether an individual application worked well is sort of beside the point for whether the system in general is working well. Our intention is to streamline and expedite the process writ large. And again, if you go back to our hearings, and direct you to citymeetings.nyc, where every single piece of testimony we received in our 30 hours of live testimony is there, and you can search and sort. You'll see we heard from practitioners and former borough president staff and others about the inefficiencies in the current system and how it plagues housing and infrastructure projects.
All right. And one last question, and I'll just say as well for questions on the city map, I really do encourage you to get in touch with the Charter Commission team about ensuring if this proposal is adopted, a clean transition, and if there's any other details that we didn't get to, would be happy to answer additional questions over email. Moving back to ELRP, our second proposal, question number 3, what kind of open space projects would be eligible for ELRP?
Most critically, the ones that are a part of resiliency projects. So Right now, open space projects that are those that require new public space on city-owned property and adjacent to acquired property, including projects that involve resiliency and heat mitigation and flood protection benefits, have to go through a full ULURP. And we'd be making those easier to occur through ELURP. Those open spaces will be maintained by DEP or parks under the jurisdiction of the Department of Parks and Recreation, for example. And so you imagine, if you want to have in your mind the most concrete example, imagine a waterfront resiliency project that's not just going to harden a community against coastal flooding, but create new open space. The city is doing all over. And that kind of project would be eligible for that faster review so we can do more of it.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Alec, for answering questions this evening. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in, or if you're watching a recording, for watching the whole recording. So just as a reminder, these are 5 proposals that will be on New York City ballots this November. There will be another one from the state as well, which is why we've referred to them as questions 2 through 6. You can learn more at nyc.gov/charter. There's also a form to contact the charter staff on that website. So if you have any other questions that weren't addressed tonight, you can submit it there and our team will get back to you as soon as we can. But thank you all for joining us tonight or tuning in. And thank you, Alec, for handling all these questions. With that,
Hey,
good night,
thank you so
everybody.
much.